share this information with us today. So I'm going to turn them over to you. Everyone, this is Jeffrey Hill.
Great, thanks, Leon, and thanks everybody for joining me today. I understand that we have, in addition to the regular child advocates on the call, a number of navigators and CACs who are listening in to, hopefully learn some more about immigrant eligibility. And we'll see what I can do. My guess is you've had a lot of experience in working with immigrants applying for benefits through the exchange. And there are probably things I can learn from you about what you're seeing on the ground. But we'll see if we can work together and go over some of the issues that are likely to come up and see what kinds of solutions might be available. So today, basically what I want to do is start by just sort of setting the stage a little bit and talk about, what the marketplace is, how it's changed, access to health coverage, say a little bit about expanded Medicaid, benefits available through the marketplace, as well as federal subsidies. Because for those of you who work in this area, you know that there are differences between, New York Medicaid on the one hand and something like federal subsidies that would be available through the marketplace. So I think one of the complicated things we deal with a lot is the relationships between those categories. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. And then, I wanted to talk specifically about what statuses of immigration are eligible for what benefits, whether we're talking about Medicaid, expanded Medicaid, or the federal subsidies through the exchange. We'll also talk about, the basic message that I would want everybody to come away with is that everyone is able to apply for something through the exchange, including undocumented immigrants. So there are things available for undocumented immigrants on the exchange, albeit more limited, clearly, than what's available for other sorts of immigration categories. But you should understand that no one is to be discouraged from applying through the exchange, especially if there's something available for them there that could benefit them. But then I also want to just sort of go over a little bit some of the privacy protections that apply in the exchange, because I know that can be one of the significant barriers to immigrants applying for coverage through the exchange, particularly undocumented immigrants or the children of undocumented immigrants. And so I wanted to remind everyone what kinds of protections are in place and what sorts of limitations come to play on the use of that information. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the applications through the exchange, documentation requirements and things like that. So I will try to get through as much as possible. The first section I'll probably go through relatively quickly, just because I'm assuming that most everybody on the call will have some idea of what we're talking about when we talk about the marketplace, what that is, what's available there, and how things have changed because of it. So basically, the marketplace provides access to either free or low-cost insurance coverage to those who are otherwise uninsured. The benefit exchange, or the New York State of Health, as it's called here, provides access to a wide range of coverage that includes both public plans like Medicaid, Child Health Plus, as well as qualified health plans. And soon, theoretically anyway, there should be a basic health program. I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but given that it's not currently available, I won't be saying too much about that at the moment. So, who can shop through the exchange? The basic rule is that only U.S. citizens and those lawfully present in the United States are eligible for federal subsidies, right? But that's different from being able to say, okay, well, who can go to the exchange in order to try to access some sort of health coverage benefit. That's just the limitations that apply only to the federal subsidies through the exchange. New York is different because in New York, the Medicaid rules are different, and they're more expansive than Medicaid eligibility in New York is more expansive than the federal Medicaid. So many limitations that might apply in other states don't apply in New York State. So, because of that, you don't need to be a U.S. citizen or you don't need to be lawfully present to qualify for Medicaid, Child Health Plus, or emergency Medicaid in New York State. And the online portal for the exchange or the marketplace provides access to some form of insurance coverage for all immigrants. Okay, so just a quick refresher. With the exchange came new eligibility categories for Medicaid. Again, this is only Medicaid that we're talking about with this slide. Sort of expanded Medicaid eligibility up to higher income levels. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But it preserved the already existing Medicaid eligibility categories for those who might not fall into one of these MAGI categories. So to be eligible for the MAGI budgeting, which we'll talk about in a moment, that applies to pregnant women, children, parents or caretaker relatives, and childless adults ages 19 to 64 without Medicare, right? Because you remember that once you get Medicare, then you're not eligible for Medicare, MAGI coverage through the exchange. Non-MAGI, so these are the eligibility categories for Medicaid that still exist in New York State, but you can't enroll in through the exchange, but need to go to your local district. That would be Medicaid for those aged 65 and older or with disability. This can include dual eligible, so people eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. TANF, SSI, foster care, those eligible for Medicaid with a spend down, the Medicaid buy-in for working people with disabilities, the Medicare Savings Program, more limited forms of Medicaid, cancer programs, et cetera. Don't want to talk too much about these things, but basically with the MAGI budgeting, again, this is the budgeting rules that applies through the exchange. They're eligible for Medicaid with incomes up to 138% of the federal poverty level. It's another way of saying the 133% of the federal poverty level plus the 5% of the federal poverty level disregard that applies to all applications. Right, so let me just skip down. Above 138% of the poverty level and up to 400% of the federal poverty level, applicants will qualify for advanced premium tax credits for qualified health plans. So we're not talking about Medicaid anymore. And these are the federal subsidies that are more limited on the basis of immigration status than Medicaid eligibility available in New York State. There's also cost-sharing assistance for people up to 250% of the federal poverty level for silver plans. Again, these are federal benefits subject to those same limitations. We'll talk about those in a minute. So these are basically just a chart of the immigration eligibility levels for the sorts of MAGI coverage that are available through the exchange. So that would include Medicaid, which is the yellow stuff, advanced premium tax credits, which is the blue. So most of what you see on this is sort of split between those two. Purple is for Child Health Plus because Child Health Plus will cover kids all the way up to the 400% of the federal poverty level, which is the same level to which the advanced premium tax credits extend in the for the qualified health plans, and you'll notice too that there's a brief sort of a small green category that's premium assistance. This is basically the Family Health Plus wrap that brings people who would have been eligible for Family Health Plus up to 150% of the federal poverty level. Provides them premium-free health coverage as if it were Family Health Plus up to the same level. And it's that level that the basic health program will address once that comes into play, because the basic health program will add another insurance coverage option for people up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And it will coincide with the discontinuation of this, the premium assistance for Family Health Plus. All right, so federal subsidies on the exchange. Again, so these are the things that for advanced premium tax credits to provide assistance with the premium costs for qualified health plans, and they're available to people between 100 to 400% of the federal poverty level, with no other minimal essential coverage (MEC). And then there are also cost-sharing reductions, as I mentioned, for people with incomes below 250% of the federal poverty level, also without any other minimum essential coverage. But remember, these federal categories that are only available to U.S. citizens and those lawfully present in the United States, which is sort of a different immigration eligibility category than those eligible for Medicaid coverage. Okay, so again, sort of the basic message that I want everybody to get is that there's something for all immigrants through the exchange. So all lawfully present immigrants are eligible for qualified health plans and federal subsidies, but we'll talk more about what it means to be lawfully present in the United States to qualify for these benefits. And remember, too, that those categories, those federal categories, if you're eligible for QHP through the exchange, you're also going to be eligible for Medicaid if you're income eligible for that in New York, because these are people who are also going to be largely, PRU-call, so permanently residing under color of law. Sort of a holdover category that's been kept in New York even after immigration requirements for federal benefits were changed nationally in the Welfare Reform Act of 1996. So PRU-call immigrants can apply for Medicaid through the marketplace, right? Unless they, are restricted for some other reason, right? So they're not eligible, because they're in one of those, not only in one of the non-MAGI categories that we mentioned before, but also don't fit any of the categories for MAGI eligibility on the exchange. And finally, there are the options for undocumented immigrants. Child Health Plus, remember, is does not have an immigration requirement, so you do not have to be a documented immigrant in order to be found eligible for Child Health Plus. But even other undocumented immigrants are eligible for a pre-screening for emergency Medicaid, which would provide Medicaid coverage for emergency treatment. And they should also be provided with information about low-cost services for undocumented immigrants. So health services, for example, through federally funded healthcare centers. So now to get to sort of the heart of what we'll be talking about today is really sort of what are these various categories of immigration status. So the first I want to go through, and we'll be talking about these, I'll kind of introduce them here, and then we'll be talking a little bit more in detail about some of them a little bit later on. But I just wanted to refer, before we start going through some of these, refer quickly to the document that I included with this, which is the, where is it? There we go. The Health Coverage Crosswalk. It's something that we produced a year or so ago that goes through all the categories of immigration, so immigrant status, what that means, how it shows up in Medicaid eligibility, so whether it's lawfully present, qualified alien, PRU-call, and then what benefits they should be eligible for through the exchange. Remember, though, that the basic health program is not yet available in New York. It was approved in the last budget, and we do expect that to become available in New York, but unlikely to be a reality until January 1st of 2016. So not this coming January. It won't be one of the benefits that people can enroll in in the next open enrollment period, but should be one that should be available in the one following that. But there's just more to be seen there. But then, so all the others are categories that are currently available through the exchange, and that would include federal Medicaid, and New York State Medicaid and Family Health Plus, bearing in mind that Family Health Plus is going out, and I want that to go away. Sorry, never mind. ADAP or Child Health Plus for kids under 19, and emergency Medicaid. And then just a simple explanation of whether or not people in these categories are eligible for enrolling in that benefit or another. But I wanted to point out one other thing about this, and that's not only the endnotes, which are worth taking a look at because they can provide you some additional information about what the categories of immigration refer to, but more specifically the immigration status, explaining the terms. Goes through every one of the various statuses of immigration so that you can understand what it is. Now, we'll be talking about these today, but I want you to know that you have this as a reference in case you want to return to any of these questions about immigration. So getting back to today's presentation, these are the categories of coverage that enable immigrants to enroll in Medicaid through the marketplace. So these include all the categories that allow people to enroll in federal Medicaid, as well as that PRU-call status that I mentioned earlier that expands the federal Medicaid coverage in New York State to other categories of immigration. And unlike other states, any immigrant who's otherwise eligible for Medicaid has to be covered by Medicaid, even if they're in that 5-year waiting period that the welfare reform law imposed on other immigrants in other, in other states. In New York, the state has to cover those, and all that means is that the state pays for those with state-only dollars. But it doesn't mean that people are not eligible for coverage. So that's not something that should concern any applicants to the exchange. Basically, there should be no difference whether it's federal Medicaid or state-only Medicaid. What they should notice is that Medicaid coverage is effective. And we'll be talking in a moment about what some of these categories mean, but basically Medicaid coverage in New York is available through the exchange to all those eligible for Magi budgeting who are lawful permanent residents, the LPR. You'll see that repeated throughout the presentation. Certain domestic violence and trafficking survivors and their derivatives, their kids and dependents, refugees, asylees, persons granted withholding of deportation or removal, certain conditional entrants, Cuban Haitian entrants, parolees, and then the ubiquitous PRU-call. And that's to be distinguished from those immigrants eligible for federal subsidies or qualified, sort of federal subsidies through the marketplace. Now, many of these are, if you look at the categories in black, you'll see some repeated categories from the Medicaid list, but obviously you won't see the PRU-call status because that's peculiar to New York State Medicaid. So lawful permanent residents, includes green card holders, asylees, refugees, again, Cuban Haitian entrants, people who were paroled into the United States, conditional entrants granted before 1980, battered spouse, or the child of a battered spouse, of a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. But then you'll see in blue categories that are sort of a series of additional categories for of immigrants that will be eligible for federal subsidies through the exchange. So people granted withholding of deportation or withholding of removal under immigration laws or under the Convention Against Torture, individuals with non-immigrant status, including worker visas, student visas, citizens of Micronesia and Marshall Islands and Palau, temporary protected status, deferred enforced departure, deferred action status, which is a deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA, is not eligible for immigration status for QHP through the marketplace. So it's a limitation that applies to that category. Lawful temporary residence, administrative orders, staying removal issued by the Department of Homeland Security, or if they're a member of a federally recognized Indian tribe or American Indian born in Canada, because remember, technically speaking, those are also immigrants, and residents of American Samoa. So, and I'm assuming that not everybody is going to be, dealing with these categories all the time or with any regularity. But I want you to know that these categories of immigrants or the immigration status are people who are eligible for the federal subsidies through the exchange. So in some sense, though we're going through them today, the useful tool that I really want you to retain from this training is the crosswalk with all its explanations of immigration statuses that should be eligible for benefits to the exchange. So again, these are more immigration statuses that are also eligible for coverage through the exchange. So adjustment to LPR status, temporary protected status with employment authorization, special immigrant juvenile status, victim of trafficking, people with a victim of trafficking visa, withholding of a deportation or withholding of removal under the immigration laws or under the Convention Against Torture, and asylum. So, but only those who've been granted employment authorization or are under the age of 14 and have an application pending for at least 180 days. So that's a further limitation on the asylum status. And those with an employment authorization, you'll see that in the training as EAD, so employment authorization documentation or work permit, includes registry applicants, people with an order of supervision, applicants for cancellation or removal or suspension of deportation, and applicants for legalization under IRCA, and legalization under the Life Act. So, which brings us again to undocumented immigrants. So undocumented immigrants are defined as individuals who lost permission to remain in the United States. So they came in on some legal status, but then overstayed their visa, for example, or something. And they no longer retain that legal entry. So from that point on, they're undocumented, right? And then this category also includes those who entered the United States without permission. So, those are also undocumented. And undocumented immigrants are ineligible for qualified health plans through the marketplace. And that's because of the federal rules about them. And they're also exempt from the individual mandate. We'll talk in a moment about the individual mandate a little bit because there are more categories of people who are exempt from that individual mandate that also apply to immigrants. So they apply within the immigration context. So they're not eligible for QHP. They're not subject to the individual mandate. They are eligible for emergency Medicaid, Child Health Plus, and information about, they'll get information about other health benefits they can access without coverage. So should get information about federally qualified health centers and other programs available regardless of status. Remember that so if an undocumented individual is living in the household, their income would not count against the household. Now, this gets to complicated household determination questions, so who's in the household, whose income has to be counted. The general rule is if you're undocumented, your income doesn't count unless you're legally responsible relatives, so that would be a parent of a child applying, for example, their income would be counted. And also, if that parent is a tax filer with a tax identification number, an ITIN, the state applies, or actually, that the marketplace itself should automatically apply a complicated formula that prorates that parent's income for marketplace eligible children. So not all of the parental income of an undocumented immigrant will be counted for the child's application for benefits through the exchange. And that's more just to let you know that it's there. I can assure you it's a complicated formula, and you probably don't want to do it yourself. But if you want more information about it, we can help you with those things too. Okay, and finally, I wanted to talk about the privacy protections that apply to the marketplace. And some of them are privacy protections that come about through HIPAA. But there are also specific privacy protections that were introduced in the Affordable Care Act, recognizing that fears about disclosures of immigration status, particularly for undocumented immigrants, can be a significant barrier to accessing health coverage, either for the immigrants themselves or for their lawfully residing children, for example. So we don't want those things. We don't want fears of disclosure of immigration status to become a barrier to accessing otherwise available health coverage so that people can get the care that they need. So just to remind you, the basic HIPAA protection prohibits the unlawful and inappropriate use of disclosure of personally identifying information. So these are things that are defined in the HIPAA law. And that applies also to applicants applying for coverage through the exchange. And as such, it extends to all agency employees as well as agency contractors, including navigators, agents, brokers, and other assisters. So the navigators on the call, I'm sure you've had lots of training about privacy protections. And I know, some of the privacy protections have also led to complications about retaining information for purposes of tracking applications and things like that. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It provides protections for applicants, but it can make the application process more complicated. And so the personal information used for purposes of applying for health insurance coverage through the marketplace can't be used for any other purpose than accessing health coverage. It can't be disclosed to anyone not authorized to have that information. And the agency must also ensure compliance with these protections by their employees and contractors. A further protection, so remember that all family members are protected by the same privacy rules. So information about applicants and non-applicants may only be used to determine eligibility for health insurance coverage. So the child of an undocumented immigrant who may not be seeking coverage through the exchange also can't be used for any other, that information can't be used for any other reason. The fact that that person is not applying for benefits to the exchange doesn't change that. This is an explicit prohibition, and the information that's used for accessing coverage through the exchange can't be used by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement for civil immigration enforcement purposes. So information about immigrants applying through the exchange cannot be forwarded to ICE, plain and simple. And finally, so federal subsidies, tax credits, and cost-sharing reductions. So for those eligible for these benefits, will not be considered in the public charge decision if the person adjusts their status to the lawfully LPR. LPR. So there's a link there for information for immigrants, just explaining what that would mean. So because basically the idea is that if you're applying to immigrate to the United States, immigration wants to be sure that you're not doing it solely for purposes of accessing public benefits. But this is a restriction that applies broadly. It's not just to the federal subsidies, but it's also to Medicaid and things like that. All right, so let's go back to classifications and concepts. So again, these categories of immigration. Definitions in immigration law, because basically dealing with immigration issues in the exchange for helping people enroll in health insurance coverage means that you have to have sort of some familiarity with a number of areas of immigration law. So you need to know eligibility categories as they exist in New York, so the Prukal definition, eligibility categories that are available under the Affordable Care Act, so the categories that are used to define the federal benefits, which means that you also have to know the ways in which those categories were changed by the welfare reform in 1996. So basic definitions then refer, first of all, to U.S. citizens. And so who are U.S. citizens? And those would be anybody born in the United States, Puerto Rico, Guam, or the U.S. Virgin Islands. But citizenship can also be acquired either at birth as the child of a United States citizen, a USC, or through derivation, right? Then that would be through the process of naturalization. But you're no less a citizen if you've been naturalized than had you been born here or been born to citizen parents. And then there are U.S. nationals, which includes all United States citizens, so everybody in that first category, as well as what they call persons owing permanent allegiance to the United States, which would be those born in American Samoa or the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, outside of that category are the aliens, which would be any non-citizen or somebody who is not a national of the United States. And then an immigrant is a subcategory of that. So an immigrant is any alien except non-immigrant aliens. And non-immigrants are those with permission to live in the United States temporarily, but are not permanent residents. So it may be people with work visas, student visas, for example, things like that. There's a point at which these immigration categories kind of make you feel like you've dropped down the rabbit hole. It's like, but just know that you have a resource now to understand what these definitions are. And remember that lawful residence is not an immigration-related classification, but only exists in the context of benefits eligibility. So it's, that's why we talk about lawful residence for Medicaid eligibility or for eligibility for the federal subsidies for qualified health plans. Someone could be lawfully residing but not have a legal immigration status. So these would be people with what they call deferred action. So just backing up for a second, I meant to say with the U.S. citizen status, that should be verified automatically through the exchange with the use of the Social Security number. So anybody born in the United States, Puerto Rico, and the United States territories. Right, I'm just checking my notes here, see if there were other things. Okay, so you probably know this in some sense maybe better than I, just from your own experience with working as navigators and working with immigrants. There can be complicated issues related to the numbers that are provided. So what to do when somebody doesn't have a Social Security number, for example, or what sorts of numbers need to be provided for immigrants in order for the applications to go through. So applicants who are naturalized, will also need to give the number on their certificate to verify status, because the Social Security Administration doesn't always have the records of the change in status to citizenship, right? So the Social Security number itself may not be enough to indicate that status. But they should have a certificate of citizenship, and there's a number on the certificate of citizenship that should be included in the application. Okay, so lawfully residing. Again, remember that this is not an immigration category, but is a category that's used to understand availability of benefits for immigrants. So the Affordable Care Act uses lawfully present, even though lawfully present, right, but residence is a requirement for eligibility to purchase insurance in the marketplace. And so because residence is a basic eligibility criteria, generally we talk about lawful residence as opposed to lawful presence. But they're essentially interchangeable terms. So lawfully residing are all qualified aliens. So remember, on the crosswalk, there's that section at the very beginning for the qualified aliens. So who are qualified aliens? And qualified aliens, these are, this is a category from the 1996 Welfare Reform Act. It's a category related to eligibility for federal means-tested benefit programs, which would include Medicaid, right? But that's the federal Medicaid we're talking about, as opposed to the state-only Medicaid that's available also in New York State. Qualified aliens are lawful permanent residents, the LPRs from before, as well as humanitarian classification. So that would include the refugees and asylees, people under withholding of removal, Cuban, Haitian, and Haitian entrants, or certified victims of trafficking, as well as the battered spouses of children of United States citizens and lawful permanent residents, and people granted parole for a period of 1 year or more. So these are people who would be eligible for the federal benefits. Lawfully residing also includes this list of people, which also may be PRU-call, so they may be eligible for the state Medicaid, the New York State Medicaid. And so this includes applicants for immigration benefits who currently have a valid employment authorization. So it's the EAD, you see under the order of supervision, also referred to as a work permit. This also includes individuals with approved visa petitions, with a pending application for adjustment to lawful permanent residence status, or people granted withholding of removal under the Convention Against Torture, order of supervision with a work permit, parole of less than 1 year are also lawfully residing, as distinguished from the people who granted parole for a year or more that we talked about before. Temporary protected status, deferred enforced departure, deferred action unless, and this goes back to the limitation I mentioned before, deferred action under DACA. Non-immigrant visa holders who are generally not PRU-call, and applicants for special immigrant juvenile status. So in some sense, you'll also always want to refer back to that crosswalk to see exactly where people fall, whether they're PRU-call, not PRU-call, because there's not going to be direct correspondence between the two things. which is why you have the PRU-call only in New York State who are eligible for Medicaid and CHIP, but not eligible for the federal subsidies. So this would include all the categories of lawful residents, except the one that I noted before, the non-immigrant visa holders, also with some exceptions. And then unlike federal subsidies, eligibility for Medicaid and CHIP for the PRU-call classification does not require that applicants for an immigration benefit have employment authorization to be eligible for benefits. So a distinction between the PRU-call requirements and the lawful permanent residence requirements for the federal benefits. And also, unlike the federal subsidies, the PRU-call classification for Medicaid and Child Health Plus does include non-citizens granted deferred action under DACA, right? So that was that small group of those accepted under the deferred action category. For the federal benefits, they would be eligible for Medicaid through the exchange. And finally, PRU-call includes non-citizens who can show continuous residence since before 1972 without requiring them to file an application to adjust their status to lawful permanent residence. Okay, so let's move on and talk about the application process through the exchange. And this is where I wanted to just remind you briefly of the individual mandate. The individual mandate refers to the requirement that everyone apply for health insurance coverage. So if you don't have insurance coverage provided through some other mechanism, whether that's through an employer or something else, that you have to apply for coverage under the Affordable Care Act. And basically what that means is that every individual who files a tax return will have to verify that he or she has health insurance or is eligible for an exemption. So non-citizens who are not eligible for health insurance under the Affordable Care Act because of their immigration status are exempt from the mandate and not subject to any tax penalties. So that means non-citizens filing tax returns do qualify at least one of the exemption categories available under the Affordable Care Act. But remember that there are also other exemptions not related to immigration status that may be available to immigrants as well. So for the mixed status, sort of in the immigration context as well, so for mixed status families, because again, remember that families and households can include more than just immigrants, and so it can be kind of complicated when you're actually dealing with benefits applications or enrollments through the exchange. But remember that an exemption for one household member for their own application purposes does not carry over necessarily to his or her dependents listed on the return, and that each individual family member listed on a tax return will have to verify either that they have coverage or are eligible for an exemption. So I think one of the difficulties has to do with who is defined within the household and whether they're immigrants or non-immigrants, and what does that do for the application. So for each household member, you need to verify either a Social Security number, or you could say the Social Security number is not available. And for those without a Social Security number, they should be able to provide a tax identification number. And then they should also, so let me just stop for a second. So in some instances, we've heard of problems of children without Social Security numbers being asked to show proof of some kind that they have no Social Security number. We're told by the Department of Health that this is something that should have been fixed. and should no longer be a barrier in enrollment through the exchange. But do let us know and let the Department of Health know if you encounter problems with this, because they've been asked to be kept informed if it continues to be a difficulty. And then the household, for each household member, you also need to verify citizenship status, so whether they're a U.S. citizen or what their immigration status might be. And the available options are U.S. citizen, naturalized citizen, a non-immigrant, an immigrant, non-citizen, a non-immigrant visa holder, or other. So naturalized U.S. citizens we've talked about, all those born in the United States, Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, etc. Naturalized citizens listed as a separate category, presumably because, as I mentioned before, the Social Security records connected to the Social Security number don't always reflect the change in status. So this will give you an opportunity to enter that status through the exchange in order to qualify for coverage. Immigrant non-citizens, that should include all LPRs, refugees, asylees, and all those who have some type of permission to be in the United States. Non-immigrant visa holders, basically, since the eligibility for marketplace subsidies is only available through the filing of income taxes, only visa holders who have permission to work and to file taxes will be eligible. But remember that because health insurance, because everybody can purchase health insurance through the exchange even without federal subsidies, this is a category that would help them, gain coverage through the exchange that would be more affordable than coverage outside of the exchange. And finally, this other category is apparently the category used in New York for those who have no immigrant status or visa. And the help drop-downs should remind application filers of the benefits available to pregnant women, children, people with HIV/AIDS, regardless of status, and emergency Medicaid. So these are the kinds of benefits that I mentioned earlier that information about which should be provided to even non-immigrants applying for coverage through the exchange. So mixed status families, remember that not all household members have the same immigration status. And just to put that in context a little bit, in 2010, for example, nearly 1 in 4 children under the age of 8 years old had at least one immigrant parent. So it's quite common that households will include a complicated array of immigrants and non-immigrants, depending on when they entered the country, who was born when and where, and stuff like that. And all eligible family members may apply for private insurance coverage or for Medicaid and Child Health Plus through the health insurance marketplace. But each household member may be eligible for a different program and a different benefit. So, a child may be eligible for CHIP. A parent, on the other hand, may only be eligible for QHP, right? And, one of the parents may be an undocumented immigrant and may not be eligible for anything other than emergency Medicaid, or sort of the pre-screening for emergency Medicaid. Eligible family members may apply for private insurance coverage for Medicaid or for Medicaid and CHIP in the health insurance marketplace, even if they're not eligible for the federal subsidies. So basically the idea is that the federal restrictions only apply to the federal benefits provided, but not necessarily the insurance that's purchased without federal assistance through the exchange. Families with marketplace eligible and ineligible members, again, these are those mixed or sort of a further category of mixed households in applying for coverage to the exchange. So an ineligible family member, a non-applicant, may complete an application on behalf of an eligible family member, right? So an undocumented immigrant may complete an application for a child. Again, so you begin to see why those privacy protections are so important. Applicants and non-applicants, alike will be asked for their Social Security numbers, but will not have to provide a Social Security number if one was not issued to them. Again, if there are problems with the kids in particular in this category, we should be letting Department of Health know. So continue to inform them and inform us of problems that you're having out there. And people who file income tax returns with a tax ID number are not required to provide their IN since the IRS will not verify their income or the fact that they filed a tax return. And finally, by law, applications may not request the citizenship or immigration status of an individual who is not seeking coverage for him or herself. All right, so immigrant non-citizens. So the help text in the New York application should describe this category, or describes this category as immigrants and non-citizens usually live in and work in the U.S. with the permission of immigration, and that would include lawful permanent residents, people granted asylum because of religious or political persecution, refugees. But remember that non-citizens also include people living in the U.S. permanently or who have some kind of legal status with immigration. But it can also include people who are applying for an immigration benefit. So that would appear to include all people lawfully in the lawfully residing category, as well as all PRU-call. So, again, I would refer you to the crosswalk for, a determination of what they would be eligible for through the exchange. And then, finally, just some brief comments on providing the numbers. Remember that Social Security numbers are not required, even though they're being asked for. And applicants who are not citizens but are lawfully residing must provide the numbers found on their immigration documents in order to have their status electronically verified through the Federal Data Hub, because the exchange is linked with these federal databases in order to verify the status. And in theory, that should help make possible the real-time eligibility determinations and things like that, and hopefully we're not encountering too many problems with those linkages. The most common numbers are the A numbers or the I-94 numbers. So the A number, that's the alien registration number, and these numbers should be indicated on the documents that immigrants have, but many immigrants will have many documents, and it's often confusing to know which things are required. But remember that the A numbers and the I-94s are the ones that you'll want to be looking for in particular. The A numbers that I'll just describe it here a little bit more fully for you. It's the 8 or 9-digit number assigned by the Department of Homeland Security whenever a non-citizen files an application for an immigration benefit or when an individual is placed in removal proceedings. Whereas the I-94 is an arrival departure record that documents a non-citizen's admission to the U.S. and the category in which he or she was admitted. So it's that categorization then that plays a role in terms of the availability of federal subsidies through the exchange, but again, will not determine necessarily the availability of Medicaid eligibility through the exchange, though it may indicate at the very least PRU-call status, if not eligibility for federal Medicaid. And the I-94 should also indicate the authorized period of stay. So, I mean, I see that I'm almost out of time here. It looks like there are about 5 minutes left for questions. I wanted to give you our information, so if you have issues related to immigrant eligibility, you can simply contact our health line, either for technical assistance through the Health Tech Assist email, email, or for referrals if you want to refer clients to us who are having issues. You can just send those through the health email address. But you can also always contact us by phone, and so that's our 800 number there. It's under extension 5822. So with that, I will stop for a while and take a few questions. I know we only have a couple of minutes, and so one option would be to send questions to the Health Technical Assistance line, or if you want to send questions specifically about this training, I would ask that you copy Leon in on those questions so that we can keep track of them. And then what I would do is consolidate immigrant eligibility questions that emerged from this training into one document that I could send out as a follow-up to everybody who attended the training so that everybody can get answers to the same questions. Because presumably one person asking a question would indicate that there are others out there wondering the same exact thing. So are there any questions that we could try to answer now, or would people like to just write them in and we can address them later? I don't know what's available. Have any questions come in?
There are a couple of questions that came in.
Okay.
The first
go ahead.
There was confusion regarding visa holders and their eligibility for APTCs. Are they eligible for subsidies? If so, what happens if they fall under the Medicaid threshold?
Oh, okay. Visa holders would be in that lawful permanent residence status, so they should be eligible for advanced premium tax credits. And if they fall under that Medicaid threshold, then at the very least in New York State, they should be eligible for state-only Medicaid. So, the simple answer to your question is they should be eligible for either the federal benefits or the state Medicaid.
The next question, are children who are lawfully present eligible for Medicaid Child Health Plus? It used to be that children on visas could not apply and had to lose their status to be eligible for Child Health Plus.
That I would want to verify simply because and I'd be happy to get more information about this, but I didn't know that somebody had to lose their status in order to be eligible for Child Health Plus. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just look into that one and maybe send out something in writing.
Okay. The next question, just to clarify, immigrants who only have work permit and a Social Security number are eligible for Medicaid?
Yes, they are.
Okay. The next question, can a list be created from the immigration documentation to indicate the exact numbers which must be used in the application process?
Oh, so it sounds like what you're asking for is a more sort of concrete tool than the the crosswalk itself. That's a good suggestion, and let me look into that and see if we can pull something together, because I think that could be a useful tool. Are there other questions?
I think that's it for now, and it's 11 a.m. So Jeffrey, I want to say thank you very much for preparing this training and presenting this information to us. And thank you to everyone that came on and spent the time with us today. Do enjoy the rest of your day. The training was recorded, and at the end of the slides, you do have Jeffrey's contact information. For any additional questions, you can feel free to reach out to Jeff via email or phone. Thank you very much, and please do enjoy the rest of your week.